back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the scientific revolution, right? But we're going to be wrapping up the scientific revolution in this flip. And I got to do it quick and I got to keep it short because shout out Brianna Bourne and Gabrielle Bush. Look at this. I'm posting it a day early. But also because I got like some food in the oven and stuff like that. And I'm the big cook in the house, so I like to make sure, everything doesn't get burnt. Now, going into it though, something we need to understand is we left off in class talking about Sir Isaac Newton, right? And his laws of universal gravitation, also his creation of calculus, as well as his publishing of this book known as the Principia de Mathematica, right? Which is going to be a very, very seminal tome, which will actually use mathematical proofs to be the essence behind all of this heliocentric astronomer shenanigans, right? Remember, go through your notes, all right? If you see words that you don't know, like in your notes, that's a red flag, all right? So just kind of do yourself a solid favor, highlight some stuff, double check some stuff, or always, as always, ask for help, right? Now, going into it, though, we're now going to pick up on the different kind of thing in the scientific revolution. We're going to look at a revolution in reasoning, all right? There are two different thinkers in the scientific revolution that we need to brush over really quickly so we can understand how they are going to contribute to the science of reason, or reasoning, right? And how we solve problems in a fundamentally new way during this scientific revolution. And the first one we have to talk about is a man by the name of Sir Francis Bacon, right? Yes, I know that's a hilarious last name. Sounds like bacon. Because it is bacon. Now, anyway, so going into it, though, so what we need to understand is he is an English scientist and parliamentarian. Very, very nice. Yes, he was actually a parliamentarian and a member of the House of Commons underneath James I and VI. So actually, we are seeing some intersection of the absolutism era and also the scientific revolutionary era because, ironically enough, they're all happening at the same time, which I know makes a lot of y'all feel like, oh my God, I hate European history. But yes, all this stuff's happening at the exact same time as the absolutism stuff. Now, going into it, though, just so we understand, Francis Bacon is going to show up and he is going to emphasize this thing known as empirical study, which is an Aristotelian form of study, right? So this is an interesting little kind of way of looking at the world because we are reviving Aristotle's idea of empirical analysis, right? Of observing what's going down. That is evidence-based study, all right? For example, if you perform an experiment, you need to observe what occurs so you can postulate an answer in a scientific manner. That is why he actually wrote a very famous book that's going to outline a lot of his big ideas, and his book was known as New Atlantis. And in this book, he did a very, very Sir Thomas More kind of thing and wrote of a utopian society. And in this utopian society, there was a scientific center, right? And within that scientific center, there was a massive building. Think about Hogwarts-style big building, right? For those of you who are Harry Potter fans out there. And imagine for a moment it was just full of scientists, right? And Francis Bacon postulated the idea that if we had a building that was full of scientists that actually did the job of solving everyone's inquiries, the utopia could be achieved because everyone would have answers based on empirical study. And in this big building, you would go to him and be like, my crops died, why'd this happen? Or my chickens won't grow, why is this going on? And the scientist would sit down and perform a study to try and bring you an answer to your issues. He is credited because of this idea with the creation of this thing known as the scientific method. The scientific method is something that y'all use in science class all the time, right? Hypothesize, gather materials, form an experiment, observe the results, right, etc., and then come to your conclusion, right? This whole thing will be outlined in his book called New Atlantis, right? And also, fun little interesting fact too is he actually died performing a scientific experiment because he actually had a chicken and he was wondering, we didn't have a chicken. He actually was riding in a carriage one night and he looked out and it was snowy outside and he wondered that, hey, if I had a chicken and I shoved it full of snow, would it stay fresh for longer versus a chicken without snow? And so he bought two chickens and one was a control chicken and the other one was not. Had them slaughtered, had them plucked, and got so excited about this experiment while he's shoving snow into this one chicken that he actually is going to get pneumonia and die because he forgot to put on his jacket because it was really cold outside, and he actually ended up dying. Now, the other guy that we need to understand, though, that's very, very important, that Mr. McCurley just sent me a video about, is a man by the name of René Descartes, right? René Descartes is a French scientist and polymath and philosopher, right? The thing that we need to understand about René Descartes is he's a very do-it-all kind of guy, right? And he also is going to have one of the worst haircuts you've ever seen in history. Big fella, we all go through a period where we think bangs are okay. And sometimes they're not. All right, so now going into it, though, you have to understand he's going to emphasize a different kind of thing known as deductive reasoning. Whereas Francis Bacon's empirical study is an inductive form of reasoning, deductive reasoning is the idea of ridding yourself of all doubt, right? Very nullius in verba, very Royal Society-esque kind of thinking. The idea that you should doubt everything that you do not know beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? If you cannot prove it and it is a known fact, you should doubt it. And what you should do is break any problem down into only things that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt and work from there, right? And this will all be kind of summed up in his ideas known as Cartesian dualism, and in a very, very famous little thing called cogito ergo sum, which is a quote that he had when he questioned one of the biggest essential things in the world: does he exist, right? He kind of sat there and was like, well, can I even prove that I exist at all? Can I prove that my perception of the world is even accurate, right? And he actually sat down in his basement for months trying to figure out, how can I prove that I really exist? How can I prove that I really exist? And he sat down and he said, wait a minute, cogito ergo sum, which in Latin means I think, therefore I am, right? And so he believes, in essence, he's like, I must exist someplace, right? Maybe it's not here in this room right now. Maybe I'm actually in an insane asylum with my like straight jacket on, banging my face into a wall going, I love European history. Well, he wouldn't be doing that. Mr. Terry would be doing that. But the thing about it, though, is he knows that he exists someplace because he has rational thought. Give me 1 second. I got to flip the chicken. Appreciate that. The wife doesn't like burnt food. Now, going into it, though, something that we need to understand as well is that this form of deductive reasoning is going to lead to him having this theory about the mind and the physical world, right? And he believed that they were separated into two separate spheres, that the mind is something and consciousness is something that doesn't exist in this physical plane, that it actually exists somewhere far beyond that, right? And that actually the physical world is something that we can manipulate through our mind, right? And he believed that it existed in two separate places known as Cartesian dualism, right? And again, he was also a mathematics nut, all right? He also even invented this little bad boy that you use in math with your x and y axis. That right there is called a Cartesian plane, right? Because it was invented by Rene Descartes, because he was sitting on his bedroom, or sitting in his bed one night looking at the roof, and he saw a fly buzzing around, and it was going bzzz, 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 and kept moving around in different spots, and he was like, if I kind of just drew some lines like back and forth, I could plot where that fly landed throughout the evening, right? And he created the x and y axis form known as the Cartesian plane, right? The other big thing we need to understand about him, though, is he's going to write all this stuff down in a book called The Discourse on Method, where he actually outlined his methodology, where he wanted to blend philosophy and science to break all larger problems down into smaller ones, right? Just into the things you know you cannot doubt, right? And then work from there to try and figure out the truths of the world, right? And he's going to make this one dude really, really upset named Blaise Pascal, who's going to like tell him that, oh, you're reasoning God out of the world. And Pascal, because of this like interference and because of this argument, comes up with that concept called Pascal's wager that we talked about the other day, right? Now, going into it, something you need to understand, though, is that the scientific revolution is going to have massive effects on society, right? You're going to see a very large growth in the scientific community because it's going to legitimize fields that are like other than theology. It's going to begin like to be funded by governments, and the outcomes are going to be linked to the state themselves. You're going to see different monarchs fund scientific academies, like Peter the Great in Russia is going to form the Russian Academy of Sciences. You're going to see Louis XIV create the French Academy of Sciences, as seen in this picture right here. And you're also going to see women barred from research, because I know some of you are like, Mr. Terry, are women going to be allowed to participate in these fields? Of course not, right? Which is ridiculous and stupid. But of course we know that women are going to be barred from research and like from other scientific study methods, which is ridiculous, right? Artemisia Gentileschi couldn't even be taken seriously as an artist, okay? So unfortunately, the scientific revolution will not be something that introduces women. And actually going forward, it takes all the way until the late 1800s, early 1900s with Marie Curie until women are recognized as legitimate scientific contributors, which is disgusting. It should have been way earlier than that, right? And also, though, the debate between religion and science is going to begin. Now, speaking of, something we need to understand is just because the scientific revolution is raging on does not mean people are going to abandon their faith, and it does not mean that people are going to abandon old ideas. They still are going to believe in alchemy. They're still going to be faithful, and they're still going to believe that God has a hand in the world, regardless of the developments of science, right? Now, going forward, we have one other big thing that we need to talk about, and it's the medicine, the body, and how chemistry affects all that fun stuff, right? So something that you need to understand is that the scientific revolution is a lot like the Renaissance, right? And it's going to see a re-rise or a coming back of ideas from ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, right? Now, Greco-Roman perspectives on the human body are all going to be linked back to one ancient philosopher, right? And he's a man by the name of Galen. Hi, Miley, by the way. Pierre says hello. So like now going into it, though, Greco-Roman perspective on the human body was outlined by an ancient philosopher by the name of Galen. And he believed genuinely that the body and its like sicknesses were caused by an imbalance of 4 different fluids. Galen believed that the body is made up of 4 humors or fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And he believed that any of these stuff that was out of balance would lead you to getting sick, right? Which is the methodology behind bloodletting, right? In the Middle Ages, when they kept believing in this for a really long time, that's why you literally would go to get somebody let blood out of you, because that was the idea. that would make you more healthy. And you can also even see this in common day society when you look at a barber's pole, right? Because a barber's pole actually is a place when you used to go get your hair cut at a barbershop. These red poles, the red symbolizes blood and the blue symbolizes clean water. Because not only when you went to the barbershop before, or during the Renaissance era, the 1600s and before in the Middle Ages, not only could you get a bloodletting operation done, you could also get your teeth pulled, which was like a simple dentist as well. Give me 1 second, gotta check the food. Almost done, all right? But anyway, speaking of almost being done, this flip is almost done, all right? But those 4 bodily fluids are going to be the basis of most medical science going forward for hundreds of years, until some other folks start showing up during the scientific revolution, including people like Andreas Vesalius, right? Andreas Vesalius is almost linked more to the Renaissance than he is to the scientific revolution because he did most of his work so early on, right? He is going to publish a very, very important book called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, right? And De Humani Corporis Fabrica, what it means is actually on the fabric of human beings, right? It's the very first structure of the human body book and an anatomical and anatomy textbook, right? It was published the same year as Copernicus's major works in 1543, right? So Andreas Vesalius is going to be the very first person to defy Catholic law and defy religious, what's the word I'm looking for? Tradition at the time, and he's going to start dissecting bodies, right? He's going to start dissecting human cadavers, right? Peeling the skin off them to see the muscular structure that exists underneath the human body, and also looking at the arrangement of the bones and the skeleton itself, right? And he starts realizing that there's no way Galen is correct, because where is this blood, or this black bile and yellow bile? Where is this phlegm? Where are these suppositories for, right? And so he begins to actually do so much studying of this that it becomes a breakthrough textbook that unproves a lot of Galen's early ideas, right? And Andreas Vesalius' book about anatomy will then become a foundation for many medical colleges going forward for advancing the study of the human body, advancing the study of anatomy, and understanding the purpose, use, and function of many different human organs, right? And also a big thing about Andreas Vesalius as well is that book, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, the oldest copies of it are actually bound in human skin, right? Which is gnarly. And I know somebody like Gio would probably love that fact, because literally these books had human skin bindings, right? Because he had a lot of it laying around, so you might as well use it. So going into it, then we have one more guy that has to do with medical sciences, and his name is William Harvey, and he is another English scientist, right? Andreas Vesalius is Italian, by the way, if I forgot to mention that. But William Harvey is going to pick up where Vesalius left off, and he's going to start doing some more discussion, some more study, and some more insights into the human body, specifically the heart. He writes a book called De Mortu Cortis, right? Which he bases off the science of vivisection, right? So the thing that we need to understand, though, is he's the chief medical officer during James I and VI's reign. He knew Francis Bacon. They had met multiple times, right? And William Harvey is going to dynamically shift the way that we look at the heart, right? More than anything else, he's going to realize that the heart is a pump, right? And it actually moves blood throughout the body. And the way he figured this out is by dissecting animals while they're still alive, right? And that's what a vivisection, it's not dissection, it's vivisection, right? And realizing, though, that if you get to a body before it dies and before the heart itself starts beating, you can see it pumping and see it move the blood throughout the body at that very, very specific rate. Now, ironically enough, he ends up getting fired because of this and dismissed from the royal monarchical houses when he comes up with all these ideas. He's like, hey, I did some dissections and vivisections and realized that the heart is a pump and these organs have all these other jobs too, and we should really devote some more study to that. And he ends up getting fired, right? And the irony is that after he ends up getting fired, Charles II gets completely tortured by his doctors to death because he had a stroke, and then they started trying to use alchemaic science to fix him, and they ended up killing him, right? So if only they would have listened to poor William Harvey, everything would have been a little bit better off, right? But now what we have to understand, though, is that there's a little bit more about medicine in the body, and we're talking about Robert Hooke and Leeuwenhoek. And these two guys invented the microscopes, right? So something that we need to understand is first is Leeuwenhoek's device came first. This one right here is the one that pops up first. Leeuwenhoek actually is a Dutch scientist who comes up with the very first microscope ever. It's very small, and it's like a little paddle. It's got a little lens right there and a specimen holder right there, and it actually could hold the slide right there. You put it up to your eye, and he could see different things, right? One of the biggest things he looked at was pond scum early on, and he could see small organisms moving around in the water. So it's really interesting when you look at people like Galileo, who's looking at the planets and the cosmos, but also Leeuwenhoek's going to realize there's a whole world that we can't see with the naked eye, right? And he's going to actually realize that using his microscope, you can see glimpses of that world, right? And then Robert Hooke is going to take this idea, the premise of a microscope, and do what Galileo did for the telescope and add multiple lenses to it to make it so you can see things with way more definition. And Robert Hooke actually copies and draws a lot of the things that he saw underneath his compound microscope, right? This right here, for example, is a lice, or a louse, right? It is a louse that he actually saw under his microscope. But now what we're going to be doing in class is we're moving into the Enlightenment, right? We're going to be moving into the Enlightenment in our next discussion, talking about where science comes up short, Enlightenment takes over, right? Because the Enlightenment's all about philosophy. And you have to understand, when you look at all these different things on this timeline, when you got De Rev coming out in 1543, the 30 Years' War was going on at that exact, or like right after that, right? The 30 Years' War haven't even started yet. So this is what I'm talking about with your timeline of European history. We're bouncing around a lot. In the Scientific Revolution, we jumped backwards heavily, right? Because you've got the English Civil War coming out, which is going to be a really big deal. And De Rev and Nicholas Copernicus did all of his work before that, right? You're going to see Tycho Brahe and Kepler's works come out right around here between the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War ending, right? The Principia is going to come out in 1687, right after this is over. But then following that, the Scientific Revolution will lead to the Enlightenment, because you're going to see the two treatises on government by Locke that's going to be written, right? Peter the Great's Grand Embassy Tour, when he went on tour of those other places, when he went with all the nobles, he didn't do that until 1697, right? After the Enlightenment was already in full swing. So as you see, though, the Scientific Revolution caused the Enlightenment, right? And what we need to understand is this is all happening in the world of the late Reformation and absolutism rising up in Europe. We'll talk more about this in class when we have that quiz, and I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.